Good morning, dear students. Let us move on to our next session, that is regarding the green chemistry. See, green chemistry, it is a newly emerging branch of chemistry, and also, as the word itself says, it should be eco-friendly. That is, what all activities that we are doing in our chemistry lab or generally in general we are doing, all these should be eco-friendly, or that we should be keeping our environment apart from its, it should not cause any damage to our environment. Okay, so that is what this green chemistry is also dealing with. That is, we should be eco-friendly, we should keep an eco-friendly way in our laboratory as well. And also for that, so many several techniques have been adopted in this green chemistry, and a part of that green chemistry, that is what is called as this micro scale analysis. Okay, micro scale analysis. So as the word itself, it is a micro level of analysis, or we are doing in a micro manner. And also this micro analysis, it is a part of green approach, or it is a part of green chemistry. It's a part of green chemistry, or it is a green approach used in this analytical technique. Normally you have been used in your +2 lab. Sometimes you might have used some test tube of 20 ml or so, isn't it? 20 or 15 ml test tubes you might have used, isn't it? But nowadays this type of test tubes, it is avoided, and we are using only 5 to 10 ml test tubes, so that we can take the quantity in a very or we are consuming the reagents in a small volume, isn't it? That is, we will be taking only 5 to 10 ml of a particular reagent. Okay, otherwise if we are having a 20 ml test tube, we will be taking about 15 ml of the reagent, isn't it? So that we are doing a harmful thing to our environment, isn't it? So while taking the reagents, almost all the reagents, they are not eco-friendly, isn't it? It is it will not be most of the reagents, it will not be degrading, or it will not be disintegrating while reaching to the to our environment or to the soil. Most of the reagents that we are using in our lab, we are washing it in the sink, and what happens, it will be going to our soil and will be accumulating there in the soil, isn't it? All those metals, even sometimes while we are using thermometer, sometimes it might be broken, and that mercury, etc. All these chemicals, they are so much hazardous to our environment, and it will be reaching directly to our soil while we are doing practicals, isn't it? So that is why this micro scale analysis has been used for recent years in our lab, for 4 or 5 years. That is the recent development in this area, that is in green chemistry. That is in our labs also, in colleges also, we will be adopting this micro scale analysis. And also while in our lab also, you will be doing micro scale analysis. That is, you will be using test tubes of this particular quantity or this particular volume, about 5 to 10 ml. Okay, and also normally for macro analysis, so micro, if you want to know, then you have to study what is a macro. So macro analysis means there you will be using a sample of about 0.1 to 10 gram. Okay, see the sample weight, it will be ranging from 0.1 to 10 grams. So huge amount of samples or reagents or weight of the sample we are using, isn't it? So instead, in the case of micro analysis, we will be using only a sample of samples of about 1 to 10 milligrams were used. Okay, you have to imagine the sample weight. Okay, it's about 1 to 10 milligram in the case of micro. So that much of reduction in the use of reagents or the use of chemicals in our lab, that has been achieved so far, that we are doing now in our labs. Okay, so micro scale analysis means we will be taking any chemicals in this particular weight. Okay, it's about 1 to 10 milligram. That only we are doing here in the case of micro scale analysis. You might have done your salt analysis, isn't it? Here also in our lab we are doing salt analysis, and there we will be taking about the chemicals or the salt, the mixture in of weight 1 to 10 milligram. Okay. And also this is the basic fundamental thing, that is micro scale analysis means it is a green approach. So we are consuming a very little of, or we are using a very little of the substance, whether it is a reagent or it is a chemical, whatever it is. Okay. and that is a part of this micro scale analysis. And also this normally this micro scale analysis, or in labs micro scale analysis means we have to change all our equipments, isn't it? For also even this test tubes also we have to change. Usually in our lab we will be having about 200 or 400 test tubes are there, so you have to change this 400 test tubes to this measurement, that is up to 5 to 10 ml. That is we have to buy these range of this volume of test tubes. Okay, this much test tubes we have to buy. So that usually that will cause a large economic imbalance usually in our working atmosphere, isn't it? So but only for the first time it is much expensive. After that we will be saving a huge amount of money in the form of as part of the chemicals, and also in the case of test tubes as well, and also in all the apparatus used in our lab. So we are saving a huge amount. Large savings will be there while we are converting from macro to micro, a large scale. That means it is almost cost effective, and also several DIY. Sometimes we can call it as DIY. Sometimes we can use some other cost-effective methods can also be adopted. Okay, so this we are having a large savings from the part of the amount of chemicals used, from the part of glasswares, chemicals, then glasswares, then storage as well as disposal. In all these areas we will be having so much savings as part of this micro scale analysis. Okay, and also for some cases we can use some household materials also. Say for example tablet pockets, instead of spot plates we are using in our lab spot plates. It's a ceramic one, and so instead of spot plates we can use this tablet packets. That is the medicinal packets, that while we are having some tablets also, that tablet packets we can use instead of the spot plates. This is one. Then injection bottles instead of reagent bottles. These are some of the saving techniques. Okay, injection bottles instead of reagent bottles. Then pen refills instead of glass tubes. Pen refills instead of glass tubes, etc. So many techniques we can adopt while we are at lab. Okay, and also next we can go through some of the advantages of micro scale analysis. Advantages of micro scale analysis though. So the first point is it will be saving time and energy. It will be saving time and energy. Time, how can we save? That is, we are taking only a very small quantity of the sample, isn't it? So the energy for the for heating that sample, that is why if we are taking a 20 ml test tube and we have to heat that reagent, and the reagent it is almost about 15 ml, it will be taking lot of time while considering a sample of 5 ml, isn't it? So in such cases and also for heating we will be using some energy sources also, isn't it? So there we can save the time as well as energy. So that is the first advantage, we can save time and energy. And also the cost of chemicals and equipments. Cost of chemicals and equipments can be reduced to 1/3. Can be reduced to 1/3. Then the next point, next advantage is that it reduces waste. Consumption is also low, therefore waste will also be low. And also can avoid the release of harmful chemicals. Can avoid the release of harmful chemicals. Then also in our lab we will be using a minimum quantity of toxic gases like H2S. You know the smell of H2S, it is having the smell of rotten eggs, isn't it? So we at the lab we are having a minimum, we are using a minimum amount of H2S. And also, since we are using the micro scale apparatus, what happens? We require only a smaller storage area. Smaller storage area for storing these apparatus as well as the chemicals. Then shorter reaction time. The reactions can be done much faster, isn't it? Then more safety, because poisonous gases, the amount of the release of gases will also be lower while we are using the chemicals at a low quantity. Then therefore we will be having a pleasant working atmosphere. Pleasant working atmosphere. Pleasant working atmosphere, and also less workspace is required. Less workspace is required. Then for cleaning, for setting up and cleaning of the lab. For setting up and cleaning the lab. Less time consumption. Less time consumption. And also we can work with smaller quantities of reagents. Small quantity of reagents. So these are some of the advantages of using microscale analysis. Okay, so this is very important. It might be asked in your section C part. Okay, normally it is asked for a 4-mark question. So you have to study this microscale analysis also. Then moving on to our next session, that is regarding the quantitative analysis. Quantitative analysis. See, quantitative analysis, we are already seeing the definition for quantitative analysis, isn't it? It is the, here we are determining the quantity of a particular substance. Normally, this quantity, it is determined by normal titrations, isn't it? Volumetric estimations. We are doing it by volumetric estimation. So here we are determining the quantity or amount of the substance present in that solution. Okay. Amount of the substance present in that particular solution, that is we are determining the quantity. That is what is called as quantitative analysis. So here I'll be giving an introduction about this quantitative analysis in this video. So first of all, you have to know what do you mean by a volumetric analysis or volumetry. Volumetric analysis or volumetry. Volumetric analysis or volumetry. See, volumetric analysis means we will be having a solution of known strength. We will be having a solution of known strength, and to that solution we are having a solution of known strength, and we are adding or we are titrating the solution of known strength with a solution of unknown. That is, we are not sure about the normality or strength of that particular solution. So a solution of known strength, it is titrated or it is reacted with a solution of an unknown concentration. Unknown concentration or an unknown normality. So by titrating these two, we will be having a volume of the, we will be getting a volume of the solution used up, isn't it? Suppose we are titrating NaOH against HCl, and this HCl solution, we have to, we knows the strength of this HCl solution. You have to determine the normality of this NaOH. Okay, so for that we will be taking a solution of 20 ml of HCl, and we are titrating, say the normality of solution, let it be 0.1023 normal. Okay, so we knows the normality of this HCl solution, and to that we are adding or we are titrating this NaOH solution. Okay, so first of all, this volume, it is unknown. We are titrating this solution with NaOH solution of unknown concentration. We doesn't know the concentration of this NaOH. Okay, so for that we will be taking or we will be pipetting 20 ml of NaOH solution, and to that we are titrating this known HCl solution. Okay, so therefore, in the case of NaOH, we can put it as the normality of NaOH and HCl. Let the normality of HCl, we can put it as N1, and let the volume of HCl used up, let it be V1, and for NaOH, let the normality, let it be N2 with volume V2. Okay, so while during the titration, at a particular point, what happens? The endpoint will be occurring, isn't it? So at that endpoint, we know there will be a color change. For that, we will be adding an indicator also at the start of the reaction, isn't it? At the start of the reaction, while pipetting out NaOH, we will be adding some indicator, and at the end point, we will be having a color change as a result of the end point. That means at that particular point, at that end point, what happens? The reaction is completed, isn't it? That means the reaction will be completed. That means this particular reaction, since it is NaOH HCl titration, we can call it as a neutralization reaction. So during that particular color change, we will be having the neutralization point, or the reaction is completed. So we will be having a particular volume of HCl. So N1, we knows the normality of HCl. V1 also from the titer value we will be obtaining. So the equation is N1 V1 is equal to N2 V2. And here we have to find out the normality of NaOH or NNaOH. Okay, NNaOH, VNaOH. Then here it is NHCl, VHCl. So NHCl into VHCl is equal to NNaOH into VNaOH. We have to determine the normality of NaOH. So therefore, from this equation, we can calculate the normality of NaOH. That is equal to normality of HCl into volume of HCl. That is the amount of HCl used up during the titration, divided by volume of NaOH. Volume of NaOH is 20 ml that we have pipetted out. So from that value, we will be having the normality or strength of this NaOH. So this is how we are doing the titrations normally. So here you are using, for this volumetric analysis, we are using a solution of known strength, and it is titrated against a solution of unknown concentration. And while at the start of the reaction, you are adding indicator. And if we are using NaOH and HCl, there will be an end point. That is, if it is an acid-base titration, there will be a neutralization point, and that is the end point of that particular reaction. So for determining the end point, or for visibly noting the end point, we are adding the indicator. Okay, that is the purpose of indicator. So this is a brief introduction about this volumetric analysis or volumetry. Then the next is, you have to be clear about these terms. Then the next term, that is the standard solution. Standard solution. See here, standard solution means it is a solution of accurately known strength. It's a solution of accurately known strength. That means, say sometimes if we are taking more salt. Have you heard of more salt? The equivalent mass of more salt, it is 392. Equivalent mass of more salt is 392. Suppose I am taking 3.92 gram of more salt. 3.92 gram of more salt in 100 ml. That is, I am taking a 100 ml standard flask, and I am accurately weighing 3.9200 gram of more salt and dissolving. Normally, while we are taking more salt, we will be adding sulfuric acid also 20 ml in order to prevent the hydrolysis of more salt. More salt is ferrous ammonium sulfate. Okay, if we are not adding the sulfuric acid, it will be converted to ferric. Ferrous is Fe2 plus, and if we are not adding this sulfuric acid, it will be converted to ferric. So in order to prevent the hydrolysis, what we are doing, we are adding the sulfuric acid also. So for the time being, you just keep this in mind. That is, we are taking 3.92 gram of more salt in 100 ml. That is 100 ml standard flask. There will be a marking. Up to the marking, we are preparing that solution. That is, first we are weighing the salt to the standard flask, then adding a little amount of water. We are dissolving that this more salt. Before that, we have to add sulfuric acid also, and after adding 20 ml sulfuric acid, we will be adding a little amount of water also, then dissolving it, and we have to make it up to 100 ml. So that solution, we can call it as a standard solution. That means it is a solution of known strength. Okay, it's a solution of known strength. This is how we have to prepare a standard solution. So standard solution means the decimal. See here the decimal I had written 3.9200. You have to write the decimals up to 4 places. That is, after the decimal point you have to write up to 4 places. Then only it will be an accurate weight. Okay, should not write it as 3.92. If it is 00, you have to write it as 3.9200. And if it is 3.9205, then you have to write it like this. That is the accurate weight. That is weight up to 4 decimal places you have to write decimals. Okay, that is the accurate weight. So by taking such an accurate weight of the solution, we can call it as a standard solution. Okay, the weight will be correct up to 4 decimal places. So that is what is called as a solution of that is called a standard solution, a solution of accurately known strength. Then the next term, that is the primary standard. Primary standard. See, primary standard means a substance which is 100% pure, and also it should be a stable one. A substance which is 100% pure and also a stable and also has got a stable form. It is called as a primary standard. See, normally we will be using sodium carbonate for the preparation of a standard solution. So those substances which we are using for the preparation of a standard solution, that is what is called as a primary standard. Normally we are using sodium carbonate, then sodium oxalate, Na2C2O4, sodium oxalate, then oxalic acid, H2C2O4, crystalline oxalic acid, that is oxalic acid crystals, H2C2O4, that is oxalic acid crystals. H2C2O4 is oxalic acid, COOH, that is oxalic acid crystals. Then potassium dichromate, K2Cr2O7, potassium dichromate. These all substances we are using as a primary standard. That means these primary standards should have some essential requirements, or it should have some specific characteristics. Okay, so the first point is that it should be 100% pure and should be in the stable form. And some of the examples of this primary standards are sodium carbonate, sodium oxalate, oxalic acid crystals, then potassium dichromate, etc. are some of the primary standards. Then we can go through some of the characteristics of this primary standards. If only they are satisfying these essential characteristics or these essential requirements, they can be used as a primary standard. Otherwise it cannot be used as a primary standard. So these are some of the specific characteristics of this primary standard. They should have some special features. Then the first point is that it should be available in pure dry form. It should be available in pure dry form. That is the first point. Then the second point, it should be soluble in suitable solvent. Soluble in suitable solvent. Normally we are using water as a solvent. So mostly it should be soluble in water. Water is a universal solvent and normally we are preparing solutions in water. Okay, so it should be soluble in suitable solvent. Then the next case, and also the solvent used is water. Then the next point, it should not be hygroscopic. It should not be hygroscopic. Not hydro, it is hygroscopic. See, hygroscopic means, the word means it should not absorb water from the atmosphere. Shouldn't absorb water from the atmosphere. See, what happens is that, say for example, I'll be telling you one example for a hygroscopic substance, that is sodium hydroxide. Sometimes you might have seen, if we are taking one or two pellets of sodium hydroxide in a watch glass, what happens is that after some time, after 2-3 minutes, what happens is that it will be absorbing moisture from the atmosphere, and it will be this, normally this pellets of sodium hydroxide means it is in the solid form. So if we are kept in an open space, what happens is that it will be the sodium hydroxide pellets, it will be converted to pellets. It will be converted to liquid form. That means it will be absorbing moisture from the surroundings and it will be converted to a saturated form, or it will be converted to a liquid. So that property of chemical substances, that is called as the hygroscopic nature. So what happens is that if a substance, if a chemical we are taking, if it is hygroscopic, what happens while we are taking the weight of that particular substance, what happens while keeping it in the balance itself, what happens sometimes if we are taking a 0.2 gram of the sample, and what happens is that within 2 or 3 minutes it will be absorbing moisture from the surroundings, and what happens, the weight might be changed to 0.3 or 0.4. 0.300 or 0.400. So what happens, the actual weight of the substance will be changed, and again the substance will be converted to liquid. So that type of substances we cannot use in our lab for as a primary standard. Okay, that we cannot use as a primary standard. So those substances which are hygroscopic, it should not be used as a primary standard. So that is the next important point. Then the next point is that it should not be oxidized by air. Should not be oxidized by air, or should not react with carbon dioxide. That is, it should not have any reaction with air, means it will be normally reacting with oxygen, isn't it? So it should not be oxidized by air or should not react with carbon dioxide. That is another important point. Then one more point to be noted down is that the reactions should be stoichiometric. The reactions using a primary standard should be stoichiometric, and it should be having instantaneous reaction. That is, while we are doing the reaction, it should not take much more time. That is, it should not react in a slower manner. It should be a faster reaction while using this primary standard. Okay, so these are some of the important characteristics. So the first point, it should be available in pure and dry form. Second one, soluble in suitable solvent, that is in water. Should not be hygroscopic, should not be oxidized by air, or should not react with carbon dioxide. Then it should be stoichiometric. The reactions with these primary standards should be stoichiometric and instantaneous. And also you have to write the examples as well. So this primary standard, normally it will be asked in section B part. For 2 mark question it will be asked. So you have to study this also. I am telling you the important ones only, but you have to study. You should not skip any of these portions. Okay, I am just saying that it is important. You should not skip the other portions which I am not saying as important. Okay. Then the next comes the theory of acid-base titrations. Before that, you have to go through what is a titration. Titration I have explained already. Again, I will be writing the definition. The process of adding the solution from a graduated vessel. Normally graduated vessel means we are using commonly a burette, isn't it? The process of adding the solution from a graduated vessel to the known volume of the substance. To the known volume of the substance being determined. That is, to that solution which is having an unknown concentration, isn't it? Be a known volume of the substance being determined until the reaction is just complete. Until the reaction is just complete. That is called as a titration. So here we are using the titration from a burette, we are adding a solution of known concentration from burette to solution of an unknown concentration, and usually there we are adding the solution from the burette to a conical flask. Okay, so that process is called as titration. And also here two more terms are there to study, that is titrant. What do you mean by a titrant and a titrate? Titrant and titrate. AND and ATE. And 8. Okay, titrant and titrate. See, titrant means it is the solution of accurately known strength. Solution of accurately known strength. That is called as a titrant. That means the solution we are adding, normally the solution will be adding from the burette. The solution of known strength will be adding from the burette. That is what is called as the titrant. Then titrate means the solution of unknown concentration. The solution of unknown concentration, that is called as the titrate. And also normally this titrations, normally we are doing so many titration reactions, that is acid-base titrations we are doing. Acid-base titrations, then redox titrations. That means reduction oxidation titrations. Then comes precipitation titrations. Precipitation titrations, and then complexometric titrations. These are all some of the titrations that we are doing in our lab. Acid-base titrations, redox titrations, that means reduction and oxidation reactions are taking place simultaneously. Then precipitation titrations as well as complexometric titrations. So next we have to go through in detail about the theory of acid-base titration. I hope up to this you are clear. Next is the theory of acid-base titration, that you have to go in detail. Theory of acid-base titrations. So normally in acid-base titrations, alkali solutions are titrated against acid, isn't it? Alkali, it is titrated against standard acid solutions, or it can be in a vice versa, that is acid solutions can be titrated against standard alkali solutions. These two titrations are usually done in acid-base titrations, that is alkali against standard acid solution, and also it can be acid against standard alkali solutions. Okay. So, the estimation of an alkali solution using a standard acid solution. Estimation of alkali solution means we are, the strength of the alkali is not known, isn't it? The strength of the alkaline solution is not known. It is an unknown, it is having an unknown concentration. So, it is titrated against a known concentration of acid. Okay, that means it is a standard acid solution, that we can call it as an acidimetry. That type of titration we can call it as acidimetry. Okay, then the second case, that is acid versus standard alkali. That means their estimation of acid solution, or we are having an unknown acid solution and it is titrated against a standard alkali solution, and it is called as alkalimetry. So these two terms you should not get confused. Estimation of an alkali solution using standard acid, it is acidimetry. You have to remember this point. Standard acid means it will be acidimetry, and if you are taking standard alkali, it will be alkalimetry. Okay, and also normally this acid-base titrations, acid versus base means the reaction, it is called as a neutralization reaction, isn't it? Neutralization reaction. Acid-base titrations, it is called as, or acid-base reaction, simply we can call it as a neutralization reaction. Then again, in the case of acid-base titrations, we will be using some indicators. And also this indicators means normally these indicators are pH dependent. It will be depending on the concentration of the strength of the solution or pH of the solution. See, these indicators are used for noting down the visible change of the neutralization. Otherwise, if we are not adding the indicator, we cannot know about the neutralization or whether the reaction is completed or not, isn't it? So we have to have a visible change in that particular reaction. Otherwise, we will not notice the end point. So for noticing the end point, we are adding indicators, and also so many indicators are there, and the indicators, they will be pH dependent. That means they will be showing color variation between a particular range of pH. And I will be telling you some of the examples of this indicators. Say for example, you might have heard of this phenolphthalein. LEIN, phenolphthalein, and also the pH range of phenolphthalein, it is between 8 to 9.8. And in acid solution, this phenolphthalein, it is colorless. That is, if you are adding phenolphthalein to an acid solution, it will be colorless. And in alkaline solution, what happens? The color changes to pink. Okay, so this phenolphthalein will be showing color change only at this pH, that is between 8 to 9.8. 8 to 9.8 means it will be an alkaline solution, isn't it? From 7 to 14, the solution will be alkaline, isn't it? So this only between this pH range, what happens? This phenolphthalein will be showing colorless, and also in acid solution it will be colorless, and in alkaline solution up to 9.8 it will be having a pink color. So phenolphthalein is the most commonly used indicator. Then sometimes you might have used this methyl orange. The pH range is between 3.1 to 4.5. and it is red in acid solution and yellow in alkaline solution. Okay, if you want, you can do the test. In acid solution, if we are adding methyl orange, it will be red, and in a basic solution, that is in sodium hydroxide, if we are adding, it will be yellow in color. And the pH range, it will be showing a color change, sharp color change between this range 3.1 to 4.5. Then another commonly used indicator is methyl red. And this methyl red, the pH range is between 4.2 to 6.3. The color is red again, here it is yellow. So these are some of the commonly used indicators. So many indicators are there varying at different pH. So you have to keep in mind these values and also the color change. These are commonly used by us. Okay. So this is a brief introduction about indicators. So in our next session, we will be moving on to the titration of different types of acids, that is strong acid, strong base, then strong acid, weak base, then weak acid, strong base, then strong base, weak acid. Okay, so these 4 types of titrations you have to study, and also the graphs you have to go through. That we can do in our next video. Okay, so thank you for listening and have a nice day.